So after painting the red tulip, I thought I'd have a go at some more flower paintings. So here's Purple Tulip, and it's a watercolor marker tutorial, so explaining how I'm using the Aquamarkers, what I'm doing with them to kind of achieve the effects that I'm trying to get. So the first thing they have to do is draw it out, and this is a 12 by 12 centimeter box that I'm drawing into, and I'm trying to fill it as much as possible with the flower using a HB mechanical pencil. And to complete it, I'm going to need my photo reference, my watercolor paper complete with color tester, and my 3 markers, cranberry, grape, and deep sapphire. So I start it the way that I always start doing these paintings. I start with a small bit, an easy bit, a bit where I'm just going to have to use this very first lightest color marker. So I pop on a few bits of the marker and I get the brush with some water on immediately. And every single time you can see me get the brush and it moves out of shot and comes back, that's me dipping it in the water and getting some fresh, clean water on the brush that I can blend and that I can work about on the paper with. So all I'm really doing at the moment is trying to get those little bits of marker that I've put on, work them with the brush, work them with some clean water, get the color and the water to mix, and then start pushing it around the paper using the brush. And like I said, this is the easiest way to find my way into the painting for me. I'm choosing the smallest petal and the easiest one because I'm only having to use one colour, my lightest colour that I've chosen out of the 3 that I'm going to use. And you can see me there just working back into the bit where the marker is, just trying to make sure it's really well blended with the water, because the last thing that I want is for the petals to show the marker strokes that I've actually put down. So I really try hard to work them with the synthetic brush that I'm using to make sure that they're blended together with the water. So with that small petal done, the real fun begins, and now I'm going to be using all 3 colours. So I start just using some cranberry and laying down a base of my lightest colour, which is a cranberry marker, and then I go on top of that using some grape, which is my middle colour. So it's a little bit darker and it's going to enrich that cranberry colour. And just for the very dark shadows, I pop on a little bit of deep sapphire at the bottom. And notice I start to blend at the very top of the colours where the colours meet white, so that I'm going to keep that section nice and pale. And as I work the water and as I work the colours and mix the colours downwards towards the blue, that bit's going to be the darkest bit near the bottom, and as I work the colours then back up towards the top, that's going to be the lighter section. So it's going to change tone gradually from light near the top to dark near the bottom. Now this bit at the top was actually going to meet up with another darker bit that I've got to do later, so I realised what I have to do is add some clean water, which is what you can see me doing at the top there, and just using that to gradually fade that colour out so it's absolutely pale and light at the end. I do that so it's going to be easier to blend that dark shadowy bit that I'm talking about into that bit at the top later on. Now you can see me, I've moved to one of the petals near the bottom, and I've added cranberry and I've added grape and I've added deep sapphire. And as I'm working it around now with the brush, and you can see me again working from the lightest edge, the edge where it's still a little bit white paper, then blending into the dark colours. What I've done is I've moved down to this bottom petal because I'm trying to keep from doing petals next to each other. I think I explained on a previous video that if you do try and paint your petals and they're right next to each other, then there is a chance that they can bleed and those colours can bleed together. That might be a cool effect if that's what you're after, but I hardly ever want that, so I always make sure that I jump around the flower, as it were, and I do a petal that's separate and is never adjacent to one that I've just done. Here you can see me using a little bit of paint, a little bit of pigment that was left on the brush, and I just dotted that in there and then add a little bit of water there to blend that colour that I've just put on, just to put a little bit of extra shadow on that petal that I did first, because it was very, very pale and it needed just a slightly more purpley shadow on it. So here you can see me move over to the other side of the flower, so I'm not doing any petals that are adjacent, and I add the light cranberry on first. Then once I've got the cranberry on, I start adding a little bit of the darker colour, the grape, to deepen that cranberry, and then a little bit of the blue, again using some of that deep sapphire, so I'm going to blend that blue in with those purples, get some really nice purple colours going on. So as I add water here, again I'm starting from the top, working my way downwards, and I'm starting in the lighter area, working from the paper white into the colour, and blending in with the colours, getting all of those colours mixed together. But because I've worked from the light into the colour, into the dark colour, it hopefully means that I keep that edge of the petal nice and light, because that's where the light is hitting the petal. So that's going to have a nice, pale highlight on it. and then it's going to be much darker on the sort of the side of the petal that is away from the light, and lots of deeper, darker colour. As you can see, that blue mix in there brilliantly with all of those the purples, and it gives it this much deeper, richer purple colour. The thing to notice there is really how little amount of really deep dark blue was needed to really drastically change the colour of the purples around it, and that's something to watch out when you're doing any of these kind of pictures. The darker colour that you add, the shadow colour maybe, really add that sparingly in quite small amounts, because it can really change the colours very quickly and very dynamically. So you've hopefully seen me using the brush here and popping back and regularly leaving to get a little bit of extra clean water on the brush and bringing it back and mixing it. And you can see that I like to keep the paper fairly wet so that I can really move those colours around, make sure they're fully blended, make sure there aren't going to be any marker strokes visible underneath the paint. That's the kind of thing that I really want to hide. I want to make it look almost like it's been done with real watercolours. And here you can see me adding the highlights. I went back to the water, I put proper clean water on the brush now, and I'm kind of painting along the edge of the petal with just clean water. And because the paper's still moist and the colours and the paint is still moist, what it's doing is it's bleeding. That clean water is bleeding into the colour, and it makes my highlights for me. So I just go in here to add a little bit of shadow at the top where this petal has sort of reached the top and curved around. So I'm going to get a good contrast by adding a bit of cranberry and a bit of grape, and then adding water to that so that you've got the light petal, and then it seems to twist around and become shadowed as the petal curves around that bit. Now what I'm doing is doing this petal over on this side, which is separate from on the other side, so they're not going to bleed together. The colours around it have all pretty much dried, so I know I'm safe to add the cranberry, the grape and the deep sapphire, and then start working them with water, and it shouldn't bleed anywhere. It should stay within that petal. I think there are two things to notice here. One is that when I put the marker on, I'm not particularly fussy with it. I put on quite rough, just sort of patches of colour. That's because I'm not worried, because as you can see, when I start adding the water and working it with the brush, I'm blending it all together, blending it with the water anyway, so it looks like watercolour paint. So I'm not worried about the kind of roughness of the markers. The second thing that hopefully you notice is that I leave white paper where I want it to be palest or where I'm going to want it to have a highlight. And even though I end up mixing the paint and kind of mixing it into those areas that are white, it's still going to stay very light, and it's going to be my highlighted area because I didn't slap a whole bunch of marker colour on it at the first place. And also, as you've seen, I'm not too worried about, if I flood those highlighted areas with too much colour, because it can happen when you're using anything to do with water. You can have results that are, oh, you didn't intend for it to go there, but it doesn't matter, because I can always just put my brush in the clean water and just work along the edge of that petal, and that clean water will sort of spread outwards, will bleed, and it will give me that highlight, just like I got on that petal on the right hand side. And I will do exactly the same thing with this petal. When I'm trying to achieve highlights along the edge of it, I'm just going to use clean water, drop it in, and then rely on that water pushing outwards into the colour and making those really nice highlights for me. So what I'm doing right now is the fun and the unpredictable part. I've got 3 different colours on there, and I'm using the brush and quite a bit of water. As you can see, I keep popping back to the jar and bringing some more water in here. And I'm just trying to mix them together. I'm just trying to work them with the brush, get them fully blended in with the water, and then that water's absolutely jam-packed with colour. And then what I've got to try and do is move it around to try and achieve the effects that I want to get. So here we go. This is now clean water on the tip of the brush, and I'm just going down the very edge of this petal with that clean water. And hopefully I'm seeing it run in and move out and push the colour back a little bit. And if I don't think I've got enough, I'll go back and I'll put a little extra on, and I'm just dabbing it in, just dropping it in. You don't need to work it, because as you can see, as it's moving into the colour, it'll do its own thing. You really don't need to worry about it. And how do you find out about these things? You either find out by accident, you just do it one time and you go, oh, that looks pretty cool, I'm going to do that again. Or, I've gotten a load of the tricks and techniques that I show you here from reading how-to books, how to do watercolour like this, how to do watercolour like that. And they're available from the library, or you can get them cheap on eBay or whatever. And, over the years I've read quite a few of those just to try and get an idea of the kind of different ways that you can paint with watercolour. So the best thing about doing a flower like this is I'm using the same colours for each petal, and I'm using pretty much the same kind of technique for painting each petal. So the more you get into it, the easier it becomes, because you're getting way more experienced as you go from each petal to each petal. And the only thing that I've got to change really is perhaps the quantities of the colours. I might put more grape in one area, and I might put a lot more blue. Like the petal I'm just doing now, I put a lot more blue in towards the bottom because I wanted that to be really, really dark and provide a really good contrast, so you were getting this idea that, oh, it's kind of 3D, and you can like see that petal is just sort of tucking underneath the other one. There's lots of shadow. And for this one near the bottom here, I left quite a bit of white on that section, so as I'm blending it with the brush, I'm blending these colors together, that particular area is going to look as though it's curving up and around, hopefully, and look like it's catching the light. And the petal that I'm doing right now is the sort of second half of the petal that's just to the left of it. There was one big petal, but I thought that would be kind of difficult to tackle all, you know, as one big space. So I just used the kind of natural kind of vein that you get running down the middle of a petal to kind of split that petal into two different halves that I could handle differently. And I just thought that that would make it a lot easier, and you can do that with most of the petals on most flowers. You can kind of split it down the middle and just tackle one half at a time. So as I start doing this small thin petal on the right hand side, you kind of can see that that big central area, which is going to be pretty tough and quite challenging, I'm kind of putting that off, and I'm leaving that bit till last, to the extent where I just do these very, very light petals at the top. And here I'm just using cranberry. I'm not bothering with grape, I'm not bothering with deep sapphire, because these show petal tips that are curving up and over, you know, forming a kind of cup edge shape around the outer edge of the tulip. So I'm just doing those with the lightest color because they're being hit by a lot of light, loads of light hitting those as they curve up and over. So that's why I'm just using my lightest marker with maybe a teeny bit of grape there you see me using, and blending those in so they look really pale. But I can put off the center no longer. I've got to tackle it. I've got to get in there. And I do the same thing as I did with that petal earlier on. Even though it's one massive big petal, I use the kind of vein that runs down the center. You can see it's just got a gentle curve to it there. I use that vein to run down the center to allow me to just tackle one half of the petal at a time. So I'm working it. I'm leaving that little light bit at the top, and then making sure there's also a pale bit towards the bottom. Because at the bottom, where the petals begin to grow upwards and outwards, it looks lighter and it looks paler, and it must be catching light sort of coming into the cup type structure of the tulip and hitting the bottom of it. So that bit near the bottom, near the stamen, and the bit which holds all the pollen and stuff, that is actually lighter, and I was trying to show that. So it's almost there with the petals. This is the last part that I need to try and get done. And as I work from top to bottom, making sure it's light near the top and also light near that bottom bit I'm working right now, it's then time to get the center done. This is I think it's called the stamen. I think it's the bit where all the pollen sort of like hangs out. And I just decided to introduce straw yellow, but use the same deep sapphire here for the shadows, thinking it's got a kind of a greeny shadow in there as well as the yellow. I can mix that together, blend that together. But as you can see, it was quite strong, and I wasn't pleased with the effect. So I immediately got in there with a tissue and I dabbed it and got rid of that, took it right back, and then decided I'd have to do, there's these little sort of like spiky bits that are sticking up next to the stamen. I think they've got pollen on them as well, and I decided I'd use the yellow and the blue for those, and painted those in, and still wasn't 100% happy with those, because on the reference photo I was using, those two were darker. So then I decided I'm going to use a bit of grape and a bit of deep sapphire and work that up and down a little bit with the brush, so that those two spiky little things look a lot more strong and dark against the rest of the flower. So I decided to mix the colour on a palette to do that bit in the centre. So I got a bit more control over the colour that I'm mixing before it goes on. So a tiny bit of blue, a lot of yellow mixed together, and then all I do is I just paint it on, just like if you were doing regular watercolour and going from your palette to your paper. And that just allows me to make it just as dark as I want it to be, which is not too dark. Then I had to just do that little bit that I hadn't touched earlier, and then it's pretty much finished. I'm really pleased with the 3D quality that I managed to paint in this, but let me know what you think. Post something in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe or like. And if this tutorial was useful to you, you might want to check out some of the other ones that I've posted on my channel. The last one was a bit of a change of pace. It's all the different kind of papers that you might want to use marker pens on when doing a drawing and a comparison of those papers.